I raised my niece for 20 years. I gave her everything I had. I stayed up with her through nightmares, helped her with school projects, and held her while she cried over her first heartbreak. I thought she saw me as the mother I tried so hard to be. So when she turned 25 and said, "You're not my real mom," and walked out, I felt something inside me crack. My name is Marlene Drayton, and the girl I raised like my own daughter is Ayla, my brother's child. After Ayla's parents died in what we were told was a sudden accident, I stepped in and became her guardian. I never questioned that choice. I loved her. I built my life around her. 10 years after she left, everything changed. One stormy night, Ayla showed up at my door holding a child in her arms. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was thin and scared. She said, "Aunt Marlene, I found my parents' death certificate. They didn't die in an accident. It says cause of death, homicide, and the suspect was someone we know. Stay with me, because what followed would uncover secrets I never imagined were part of our family." Before everything broke apart, life with Ayla felt steady and full. I never had children of my own, so when my brother Ryan and his wife died, I didn't hesitate for a second. I brought 5-year-old Ayla into my home. She came to me with wide brown eyes and a small backpack, holding her favorite stuffed rabbit. She wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered, "I don't want to be alone." From that moment forward, she wasn't. I learned how to braid her hair, how to calm her during thunderstorms, and how to turn a small 2-bedroom house into a safe place for a growing girl. She laughed easily back then, always running around the yard with scraped knees and big dreams. She called me Aunt Marlee, until one day she asked if she could call me Mom. I said yes without thinking twice. My younger sister Nora helped when she could, always dropping off clothes or showing up for school events. My mother, Grandma June, loved Ayla fiercely and spoiled her with homemade cookies and warm hugs. We all tried to give Ayla a childhood that wasn't defined by loss. As Ayla grew older, she became curious about her parents. She asked questions I tried to answer gently. I told her everything the police told us. There was a highway accident, and both of them passed instantly. She would study my face every time, as if searching for something deeper. By the time Ayla turned 19, she started pulling away. She became guarded and quick to argue. Sometimes she would say things like, "You don't understand what I lost." And I would bite my tongue because I did understand. I saw her lose everything at 5 years old. When she turned 25, she met someone who pushed her to dig into her past. She began to question my choices, my honesty, and my role in her life. One afternoon during a heated argument, she pointed at me with shaking hands and said, "You're not my real mom. You kept me from knowing the truth." Then she packed her bags, walked out, and didn't look back. That moment left a hollow space in my chest that stayed there for years. I kept her old room exactly the same, as if she might return at any moment. I mailed birthday cards she never answered and sent messages she never read. Nora told me to let go, but I couldn't. When you raise someone from childhood into adulthood, your heart doesn't know how to stop loving them. 10 years passed. My mother died. Nora moved across the country. Life became quiet, almost too quiet. I learned to live with the ache of missing someone who was still alive. I never expected Ayla to come back, but on a rainy night, she knocked on my door with her little boy pressed against her chest. When I opened the door, she looked different, older, tired, afraid. Her hair was damp from the rain, and her voice shook when she tried to speak. That was the moment she handed me the folder that held the truth about her parents' deaths. The moment everything in my world shifted again. When Ayla stepped into my living room that rainy night, her hair dripping onto her sweater, and her little boy clinging to her side, it felt like time folded in on itself. I saw the 5-year-old girl I once carried home after her parents died, and I saw the 25-year-old woman who walked away from me without looking back. Now she stood trembling in front of me, holding a folder that seemed heavier than anything I had ever carried. I guided her inside, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and warmed some tea while she held the folder tightly against her chest. Her son, Landon, curled up on the couch with a shy expression. I kept glancing at Ayla, trying to read her, but her eyes were unfocused. scared and lost. When she finally opened the folder, her hands shook so hard that the papers rustled. She pulled out the death certificate first. I had not seen it in more than 20 years. My breath caught as she placed it on the table. The words stared up at me with cold finality, but something new had been added to it, something that made my heart pound. Under the section marked cause of death, the word accident had been crossed out. Beside it, in official print, was the word homicide. I felt the world tilt. My fingers moved toward the paper, but I paused, afraid it might burn me. I looked at Ayla, and her eyes filled with tears as she said, "Aunt Marlene, this was changed by the state investigator's office after they reviewed old cases. I only found this because I filed for every document related to their deaths." My stomach twisted. I remembered how quickly everything had been handled back then. One phone call, one rushed meeting with an officer, the funeral done within days. No investigation, no questions. I was drowning in grief at the time, and maybe I wanted the simplest explanation. But now, sitting at the table with my grown niece and her terrified child, I felt guilt crawling up my spine. "How did you get this?" I managed to ask. Ayla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I met a retired clerk at the grocery store a few months ago. She recognized my last name and told me she remembered my parents' case. She said something never sat right with her, so she told me to request everything from the archives. I thought she was being dramatic, but then this arrived in the mail." She tapped the death certificate with trembling fingers. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a photocopy of an old police note. It had been heavily marked, but one sentence was clear: possible involvement by family member. Another line was partially blacked out, leaving only the first few letters of a name. I felt a cold chill move through my body. I tried to breathe slowly as Ayla leaned forward. Her voice was tighter now. "The clerk told me the blacked-out name belonged to someone related to us. She said she wasn't allowed to reveal it back then. She said it was someone close." The room felt smaller. I stood up and walked toward the window, pressing my hand against the cold glass. My mind raced back to the months before my brother's death. I remembered angry phone calls he refused to explain. I remembered him pacing my kitchen late at night, whispering, "I'm handling it," whenever I asked if something was wrong. At the time, I assumed it was financial trouble. Now, those memories twisted into something sharper, something darker. Behind me, Ayla's voice cracked. "Did you know anything? Did you ever wonder?" Her question felt like a stone dropped into my chest. I turned around and saw the pain in her face, the fear, the confusion. I wanted to tell her I had asked questions. I wanted to say I fought harder, but the truth was simpler and more painful. I trusted what I was told because grief makes you accept anything that stops the hurt. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't know. I should have looked deeper. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to grow up with nightmares." She looked down at her hands, and for a moment, she seemed like a scared child again. "Well, now I have them anyway." Landon shifted on the couch, and Ayla lifted him into her lap, holding him close. I could see she had been carrying this weight alone for too long. Then she looked at me with a steady, determined gaze I had not seen in years. "I want to find out what really happened, but I can't do it alone." Something inside me strengthened. I sat down across from her and reached for her hand. "We'll do this together. Whatever the truth is, we will face it. You are not alone." Alia's shoulders relaxed slightly. She nodded, and for the first time that night, I saw a small spark of trust return. The conflict was no longer between the two of us. It was between us and the past we thought was buried, and it was only the beginning. The next morning came with a heavy gray sky that matched the weight sitting in my chest. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the word homicide on the death certificate. I saw Ayla's scared face. I saw Ryan, my big brother, laughing with a beer on the porch long before tragedy touched us. I sat at the kitchen table drinking cold coffee while Ayla got Landon ready for the day. Her movements were slow, distracted, as if the truth pressed down on her shoulders. When she came into the kitchen, she looked older than she had the night before. Trauma ages people in ways time never could. I told her we needed answers, not guesses. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. The look in her eyes reminded me of the moment she lost her parents. Fear, confusion, and a silent plea for someone to help her make sense of the world again. I promised I would help her find the truth now, even if it broke my heart all over again. We decided to start where everything had ended 20 years ago, the county courthouse. It was a quiet brick building with a small flagpole out front, the same place I had signed the guardianship papers after Ryan's death. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and dust, and the fluorescent lights hummed above us. Ayla held Landon's hand, and I could feel how tense she was as we walked to the records office. The clerk behind the counter was a middle-aged man with glasses that sat too low on his nose. He looked bored until Ayla placed the death certificate on the desk. His eyebrows lifted. He scanned the document and then clicked through a computer system that looked older than some of the books on the shelves behind him. After a long moment, he said the original officer on the case had retired years ago, but a note in the system said she still lived in town. Her name was Detective Rhea Hampton. Hearing that name sent a strange chill down my back. I had never met her, but I remembered seeing it on some paperwork years ago. The clerk gave us her address, and Ayla squeezed my hand. "Let's go," she whispered. Detective Hampton's house was a small one-story home at the edge of town. A row of wind chimes hung from her porch, clinking softly in the breeze. When she opened the door, her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the death certificate in Ayla's hand, but she invited us in without hesitation. Inside, her living room was filled with framed photos of her years on the police force. She sat down slowly, as if preparing herself for a conversation she had been expecting for a long time. When Ayla explained everything, how she found the certificate, the blacked-out notes, and the clerk's comments, Rhea sighed and rubbed her forehead. "I remember your parents' case," she said quietly. "I was new at the time, but something never sat right with me. The scene looked too clean for a normal crash. The brakes had unusual markings. But the moment I brought it up, the case was handed off and closed fast." Ayla leaned forward. "Why? Why would they shut it down?" Rhea paused. "Because it involved someone important, someone close to your family. I wasn't allowed to investigate further." My heart thudded painfully. "Who?" She shook her head. "I can't give a name without solid proof. I never found enough to point to one person, but I can help you gather what you need now. If you find anything that supports foul play, I will take it to the state police myself." Ayla looked at me, and I nodded. We would do whatever it took. Rhea told us to start with anyone who had conflict with Ryan before his death. That hit me harder than I expected. Memories rushed back. Late-night calls, whispered arguments. Ryan telling me, "I just need some time to figure this out." I had thought he was dealing with business issues or money trouble. Now those memories pointed to something darker. We left Rhea's house with a plan. We would gather every document, every name, every detail we could remember. Ayla made a list of people Ryan had been close to in his final months. I made a list of anyone he argued with. Landon sat between us at the table drawing with crayons while we filled the pages. When we finished, one name stood out on both lists. A man who had been around the family for years. Someone who had a temper, money problems, and a long history of bad decisions. A man who lived only 15 minutes away. Barrett Drayton, my cousin. Ayla froze when she saw the name. I felt my stomach drop. I had tried to forget the arguments he had with Ryan, the day he showed up drunk demanding money, the way Ryan told him to stay away from his family. Now, every warning sign from the past was pointing straight toward one man. "We have to talk to him," Ayla said, and I knew she was right. Everything was building toward a truth that could destroy us or finally set us free. Driving to Barrett Drayton's house felt like moving toward a storm we could not avoid. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt. Ayla sat in the passenger seat with her hands clenched together, her knuckles pale from the pressure. Landon was at Nora's house, safe and unaware of the truth his mother and I were about to face. As we turned onto Barrett Street, old memories crowded my mind. Summer barbecues, family gatherings, and the arguments that slowly pushed Barrett out of our lives. I had spent years trying to forget those moments, but now each one came back sharp and loud. Barrett's house looked worn down compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Paint peeled from the siding, and an old truck sat crooked in the driveway. When we parked, Ayla took a deep breath and whispered, "We need answers." I nodded and stepped out of the car, feeling the ground steady beneath my feet, even though my heart felt anything but steady. We walked up the cracked path together. I knocked on the door firmly. It took a moment before I heard the heavy sound of footsteps inside. Barrett opened the door with a half-confused, half-annoyed look. His hair was grayer now, and his eyes looked tired, but his expression hardened when he recognized us. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. "We need to talk," I said. "It's about Ryan and his wife." Something flickered in his eyes, something like fear, but he stepped aside and let us in. The house smelled of stale smoke and dust. We walked into the living room where old furniture sat crowded together, and a muted television played in the background. Ayla stood straight, gripping the folder tightly. Barrett dropped into an armchair and rubbed his face. "Say what you came to say." Ayla stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but grew steadier with each word. "I found their death certificate. It says homicide, and a note from the early investigation mentioned a family member. We want the truth." Barrett froze. His hand stilled on his knee. He looked from Ayla to me, and for the first time, I saw the shadow of guilt in his eyes. He tried to brush it off. "That's old nonsense. The case was closed. You shouldn't dig up the past." Ayla opened the folder and held the certificate out toward him. "This isn't nonsense. Someone killed my parents, and you were involved in their lives before it happened. We want to know what you did." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped closer to her, ready to steady her if she faltered. Barrett's eyes filled with something dark. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the certificate like it was a living thing. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The room felt heavy with the weight of what he wasn't saying. Finally, he exhaled through clenched teeth. "I never meant for them to die," he said quietly. His voice was low, shaky. "I just wanted to scare your father. That's all." Ayla sucked in a sharp breath. Barrett kept talking, almost as if the confession forced itself out of him. "Your father owed me money. A lot of money. I thought he would pay me back if I put some pressure on him. I didn't plan anything serious. I just wanted to shake him up, teach him a lesson." My heart hammered in my chest. "What did you do, Barrett?" He ran a hand over his face and finally looked at us. "I messed with the car. I thought he would notice something was wrong and back off. I didn't know his wife would be with him that day. I panicked after it happened. I told myself it was the universe punishing him, not me." Ayla's legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The sound tore through the room. I rushed to her side and held her close while she cried. Barrett looked away, ashamed, but not enough to undo the damage he caused. "How could you do that to your own family?" I whispered. Before he could answer, the front door swung open. We turned as Detective Rhea Hampton stepped inside with 2 officers behind her. She had followed us without telling us, sensing danger from the moment we said we were going to confront Barrett. Rhea's eyes locked onto him. "Barrett Drayton, you are under arrest for the homicide of Ryan and Melissa Drayton." Barrett stood up quickly, anger flashing across his face. But the officers moved faster. They pulled his hands behind his back and cuffed him, while he shouted that it had been an accident, that he never meant for anyone to die. His voice cracked with every word, but nothing he said could change what he had done. Ayla stood slowly, wiping her tears with shaky hands. As the officers dragged Barrett out, she stared at him with a look of grief and strength. He avoided her eyes, as if seeing her would break whatever remained of his self-control. When the door closed behind him, the house felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Ayla collapsed into my arms, crying softly against my shoulder. "It wasn't a stranger," she whispered. "It was someone who should have protected them." I held her tight. "I know, sweetheart, but now the truth is out, and you are not facing it alone." In that moment, I realized the past had finally stopped haunting us. It had spoken, loudly and painfully, but it had spoken. Now we could take our first step toward healing. The days after Barrett's arrest passed slowly, as if time itself was exhausted from everything it had hidden for 20 years. The investigation moved quickly once his confession was recorded. Detective Rhea visited us several times, gathering more details and explaining the next steps with patience and care. Each visit left Ayla pale and shaken, and every answer seemed to open a door to a different kind of grief. She had lived most of her life believing her parents died suddenly on a highway. Now she had to accept that their deaths were the result of a decision made by someone who shared their blood. Watching her process that reality was painful, but I stayed close, ready to catch her when the weight became too much. Ayla and Landon stayed with me while the case moved forward. My home changed in the best way. Toys scattered across the living room, children's drawings hung on the fridge, and laughter returned to rooms that had held silence for too long. There were nights when Ayla sat at the kitchen table after Landon fell asleep, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea as she stared into the past. I sat beside her, waiting until she was ready to speak. One night she whispered, "I spent years blaming you. Walking away from you felt like taking control of something, even though I didn't know what I was trying to control. Now I know the truth was never with you. It was with him." Her voice trembled, but she lifted her head and looked at me with clear eyes. "I am sorry for leaving the way I did." The apology hit me harder than I expected. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were hurting. You needed answers I couldn't give back then. You came home. That is what matters." She nodded and wiped her eyes. And in that moment, something healed between us that had been broken for years. A few weeks later, the town held a small memorial ceremony to honor Ryan and Melissa, now that the truth had surfaced. It took place at the community park near the old oak tree where Ryan used to take Ayla on Saturday mornings. Friends, neighbors, and old co-workers came with flowers and quiet condolences. Ayla stood with Landon's hand in hers as the names of her parents were read aloud. She cried softly, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, holding her steady as she said goodbye to them all over again, this time with clarity instead of confusion. After the memorial, Ayla seemed to walk with a different kind of strength. She met with counselors, took time off work, and made plans to move back to town so she and Landon could build a life closer to me. She told me she wanted him to grow up in a place that finally felt safe. I admired her courage. She was no longer the young woman who ran away from pain. She was a mother determined to face the world with open eyes and a fierce heart. Meanwhile, Barrett's case gained attention across the county. With his confession and the new evidence, the prosecution moved quickly. He was charged with 2 counts of homicide and several related offenses. During the sentencing hearing, Ayla chose to read a statement aloud. Her voice shook, but she never looked away from him. She said she forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own peace. She said she refused to let her life be shaped by someone else's violence. I watched Barrett lower his head, unable to speak. He received a long sentence, and the judge called his actions a tragic betrayal of family. Afterward, as we walked out of the courthouse, Ayla took a long breath of the cool afternoon air. "It's done," she said. "It finally feels." I nodded, though I knew healing would continue long after the legal process ended. Still, a heavy chapter of our lives had finally closed. In the months that followed, Ayla settled into her new routine. She enrolled Landon in the local kindergarten, found a small apartment near my house, and spent more evenings on my porch than her own. Sometimes we talked for hours while Landon played in the yard. Other times we sat quietly, letting the peace fill the spaces where old hurt had lived. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Ayla turned to me and said, "You raised me twice, once when I was a child, and again now. I didn't understand what love really meant until I became a mother, and now I see what you gave me." Her words warmed my heart in a way nothing else could. I realized then that family was not defined by blood or paperwork. It was built through years of late-night talks, shared meals, tears, and forgiveness. Ayla had returned to me not just as the girl I raised, but as a woman ready to rebuild her life with truth and honesty. As time passed, the shadows of the past grew smaller. We kept the memory of Ryan and Melissa alive in gentle ways. We told Landon stories about them, shared old photos, and visited the park on the anniversary of their deaths. Their story no longer ended in mystery. It ended with justice and the strength of the family they left behind. Looking back, I realized the truth didn't destroy us. It freed us. It pushed us to confront the lies we were given and to rebuild something stronger. And even though the journey was painful, it brought Ayla back home. That alone made every step worth it. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from so I can thank you personally.